I have featured stories of the paranormal on my channel so many times that I literally lost count. People seem to share more and more of their experiences, and there also seems to be no shortage of occurrences. So you can always expect me to do more. Besides, you can always sleep tomorrow. Enjoy. I used to work doing maintenance at historic properties. There was a historic house museum I worked at when it wasn't open to the public. It was part of a whole landmark site. There was a visitor center with offices, and then the house was about a half a mile up a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with a crew, but there were a lot of times when I was there alone. One winter day, when it was really cloudy and dark, I was working alone to get ready to replace some electric work on the exterior of the house. I went inside and turned off the circuit to the entire property, tested it, it was off, locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the house when one of the lights on the inside turned on. I started to freak out, thought maybe someone was playing a joke on me. I called the visitor center on my walkie-talkie and confirmed that the only other person who was working that day was still there and hadn't left, and that all the keys to the house were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran the half a mile up to the office. I made my coworker come back with me to check out what was going on, but when we got to the house, the light was off again, but the bulb was still warm. All the doors were still locked, and the circuit was still off. Still gives me shivers to this day. I used to date a girl in college who lived 3 hours away. We would trade weekends, one at her school, one at mine. One day she got upset because she had driven all the way to see me, and I was in an all-night study session, which she had known about, and couldn't be home to see her. She texted me that she was going to go back to her place, and then I never heard anything from her ever again. After 3 days of texting her trying to make sure she was okay, the text started coming back as a number not found. I sent her the stuff she'd left at my apartment in the mail, and it returned as no forwarding address. Her instant messenger account, which I never messaged, but knew the name of, was disconnected. And it gets weirder. I called her apartment landline and was told the people who had lived there had moved out. She had 3 roommates. They didn't leave a number as to where they went. I got really freaked out and asked friends who worked in school admin to pull some strings, just to make sure she was alive. The school she was at didn't have any records of her as a student. The license plate to her car wasn't registered to anyone. None of our mutual friends ever saw her again. I called the police, but there were no car accidents involving anyone who fit her description in the stretch of road between our 2 schools. Not that night, nor in the 2 weeks after. I didn't ask for a longer time frame because at that point she was already missing. Cops wouldn't file a missing person because I wasn't a family member. To this day, I have no idea what happened to her, why she freaked out on me so bad, or if she's still alive, or on a witness protection program, or was erased from all time by an evil wizard, because she literally disappeared without a trace. When I was younger, my mom was dating this guy who we'll call JB. After a few months, he invited my mom, me, and my brother to go with him and his son, about my age, out to his lake house for the weekend. It was right on Lake Michigan, but up in a more secluded area, which was pretty awesome. Well, we get up there, and for one, I already felt really creeped out. It was a smaller 2, maybe 3 if you count the really big attic-story house. The living room / dining room / kitchen on the first floor, and had 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. His grandfather had helped build the place with his dad, and then he lived there for most of his life working as a tailor in the nearby town. When we went up to the attic, we got some beach toys because that's where JB kept all that stuff, so he didn't have to haul it up every time he went out there. Well, we went up to the attic, and I noticed in the corner covered in some dust and cobwebs about 8 mannequins. Some just upper torsos and some full body. Not out of the ordinary considering a tailor had lived there. Me and JB's son slept down in the living room on the couch since there were no more beds. And near midnight, I heard on the stairs a squeak a few times. Figuring it was my mom coming to check and make sure we were asleep, I told his son to be quiet and quickly turned off the TV and hid under the covers. After not hearing any noise for a few minutes, I looked out from under the covers and saw 3 of the mannequins moving around in the kitchen. Not like their body parts were moving, but they were sliding around in the kitchen. I swore I was dreaming, but I was so terribly frightened I hid back under the covers with a small yelp, and then heard the dragging on the floor coming closer, and peeked out, seeing one of them just a few feet from the couch. I hid back under the covers and shut my eyes, hoping it would just go away. The next morning I got up and tried not to think about it, really hoping it was just a bad dream. But when we went back up to the attic and put the beach stuff back, the mannequins were in different spots, and they weren't covered in cobwebs anymore. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but it happened, and I've been scared shitless of mannequins ever since. I'm gonna sound like a totally insane person. No one's gonna believe me anyway. This happened when I was 17. I'm 32 now. I graduated high school and got my first apartment. Nice town. Lived by myself other than my cat, Snowball. Don't laugh, I named her when I was 8. Now a few details before we get started. I've never been a fan of cat boxes. Worst part of being a cat owner, shoveling tiny shit with a tiny shovel every day. So I got one of those motion-activated self-scooping deals, left it on the back patio, ran the cord inside to power it, and left the back sliding door open big enough for her to get in and out, about 5 or 6 inches. The patio was one of those 8x8 cement floored types, surrounded by a 5-foot-tall wooden fence. If you looked out from my bedroom door, you'd be facing right at the sliding door with hanging blinds. Living room in between, kitchen was off to the right. So I'm playing some crappy computer game in my room with my back facing the door. It's about midnight, 1 a.m. when I hear Snowball start to make one of those awful cat growling sounds in the back of her throat. I'm really locked into the game, so I tell her to knock it off, not looking at her. She keeps doing it. I tell her to shut up. I'm irritated because I'm doing so good in the game. She gets louder. This is enough to break me from my gaming zone out, and I realize that this is not normal. I get up from my computer to see her standing in the doorway facing out, her back to me. She's in full Halloween cat mode, hair sticking straight out, back completely arched. She looks tense. I've never seen her that way. She's still just going crazy. I look out into the living room where she's facing. Nothing is amiss. There's nothing there. I look down at her to say something to the effect of, "What's the matter?" Then she makes an insane sound like a combination of a hiss, growl, spit, and she starts to take a few steps backwards. That's when a tiny creature runs out of the fucking kitchen on 2 legs, wearing a tattered piece of cloth or rag. It looked like a little cloak, maybe a foot and a half tall. A real-life jump scare. The cat jumps backwards about 3 feet in the air. I jump. I glance down at her as she does, but quickly look back up. I hear her land with a crash behind me and run. I am fixated on this thing. It's moving, but it's like time has slowed down. I'm watching these things happen, but everything is so fast. It runs out the back door through the blinds with a crash at speeds that don't even seem natural. The blinds are swinging. My heart is pounding, and I stand there dumbfounded. What the fuck did I just see? I'm staring at the back patio door, at the swinging blinds. I'm not moving. My eyes start to notice that something's wrong. All the blinds are softly swinging except the two closest to the opening. I see that they're making an inverted V. I look at them and follow them down to the very bottom, and then I see it. Its head is poking through the blinds, staring at me. It had yellow eyes and a face that I can only describe as bestial. Gray, greenish, blackish skin. At this point, a singular loud thought fills my mind. You aren't supposed to see this. And the conclusion of that thought. Every one of the hanging blinds shoots upward and outward. I jump again, and my heart tries to blast out of my chest like I'm a fucking Cape Canaveral. Some of them hit the ceiling. A few fell off. It was loud. The rest were swinging all over the place. I looked at the place where its face was, and it was gone. I beeline for the kitchen. Refrigerator door wide open. I open a drawer and grab the biggest knife I see. I am shaking, adrenaline like I've never experienced before. I rush to the sliding door and slam it shut. It won't close. I open it a bit and slam it back shut. Still won't close. What the fuck? I am completely stupid. The cat box cord. I crouch down, brandishing this knife like a complete idiot, looking out the glass door waiting for this thing to launch at my face. I'm shaking. I reach across myself with my left hand to the power plug on the wall to the right as I stare out, waiting to stab anything that approaches. I fumble to get it unplugged. My hands won't do anything right. I finally get the cord unplugged, and I open the door really quick to throw the cord out. I throw it like a spaz and it hits the wall and the side door and falls down, still inside, fuck. I pick it up and try again. This time it lands outside. I hear a scratching sound and my eyes dart up. I see two tiny, awful fucking hands holding onto the fence. Clawed, gnarly humanoid hands. This fucking thing climbed down feet first, hanging from the fence. It would have been slightly comical if it wasn't so fucking terrifying. The hands let go, and I hear it land in the bushes outside the fence. And I hear fast footsteps as it runs off. I slam the door, shut and lock it. I've heard it all. It was a raccoon. It was a cat. It wasn't either of those things. After the event, I started researching like a madman. Closest thing I found was in a book. I found it at the library called Fairies, which is like an art book featuring different types of Irish folk creatures. I don't live in Ireland. I live on the west coast of the United States. If you don't believe in the story, I don't blame you. It sounds ridiculous. I hate bullshit paranormal stories, and believe it or not, I am a skeptic. I believe all people that have experienced something strange or believe in the paranormal should be a skeptic. I enjoy debunking stories and videos and pictures. I want the truth. Was I hallucinating? It's entirely possible. I had an extreme and sudden hallucination. It's not unheard of. This event had a huge impact on my life and completely affected the way I view the world. The paranormal, religion, everything. Last time I was in New Orleans, I took a couple of friends to the Marie Laveau Voodoo Museum, which my friend Jessica was not impressed by. Later that day, we were walking back to the Airbnb apartment we had rented and wandered past a house that had one of those historic location plaques on it. Turns out that the house had been Marie Laveau's father's house. As we're all standing out in front of this house, Jessica is complaining about how shitty she thought the museum was, and her brand new phone went flying out of her hands and landed 5 feet away, completely destroyed. I was looking right at her when it happened. She didn't trip. She wasn't wildly throwing her arms around. There was no explanation for why her phone would have done that. It wasn't a little scratched up like it had been dropped. It looked like it had exploded from within. When I was little, I would go over to my grandparents' house frequently with my sister and cousins. My grandparents have an attached mother-in-law apartment, so we always played in there while the grown-ups would talk in the main house. One day, we were playing hot and cold with the little key we found in the apartment. While one person was hiding it, they accidentally dropped it and it fell under the door to the basement. I opened the door to get it, and when I did, there was a man standing at the bottom of the stairs that I didn't recognize. He had a bunch of stuff in his arms, like he had rummaged through my grandparents' basement. Keep in mind, my grandparents were hoarders, and their basement was full of stuff that they either forgot about or put in storage. When he saw me, he yelled at me, "Go back upstairs, kid, go!" I was so freaked out I bolted and immediately ran into the main house to tell my parents. My dad went into the basement to look, but couldn't find anyone. To this day, they all tell me I imagined it, but my sister and cousins insist it's real too. About 5 years later, both of my grandparents passed away, so I was helping my dad clean out their basement. Turns out they were missing a ton of stuff, and I haven't gone back in that house since. My family moved into an old house that was over 200 years old when I was 10. My uncle, who was a weird guy, was going to help us move in, and when we got inside the house, he got all weird and left. Always avoided coming for birthdays, etc. We always joked he saw a ghost, and for some reason we nicknamed that ghost Billy. When my little sister started talking, she would say really weird things, like asking if we could shut her door at night so she doesn't have to see the boy walking down the hallway. Fucking creepy. Anyway, we thought she was just being a big weirdo, so we continued to have this Billy the ghost joke. Something would get misplaced, must be Billy, yada yada. A few years later, we ripped open the flooring because we wanted to go back to the original hardwood that had been covered up forever ago by old owners. And if you know anything about old houses, you know that they used to insulate the floor with newspaper when newspaper became a thing. Decided to read some articles just for fun. Some talking about the first even refrigerators. Really cool things like that. Until we got to the creepy part. A mentally challenged boy named Billy, who lived in our home, died while playing on the outside of it. I saw a lot of shit growing up in that house, and I'm not a huge ghost believer. The newspaper was a fucking creepy coincidence, though, given that for years we had an ongoing Billy the Ghost joke. Uncle also ended up telling us years later that when he pulled into the driveway and was outside of the house, he just got this awful feeling. I was sitting once on the couch with my boyfriend when I heard the words, "I love you," to which my boyfriend responds, "I love you too." I was so utterly confused. I wasn't the one who said I love you. My mouth was shut. I remember hearing and feeling the vibrations of words and sounds being produced, but I wasn't the one who did it, and he wasn't either. It sounded like a feminine voice. It sounded like it came from right in front of my face. No one was outside the window or in the room with us. It was creepy as hell. So a few years back, probably 6 or 7 years, my family was living in our previous home. This was our second home we had in Ohio. The first house was about 2 streets over from our second house. One night my mom woke me up and was acting really panicked, grabbed my brother, who was probably 5 at the time, and told me to go outside. It was about 4 in the morning. Once we all got outside, my dad tried to calm my mother down. He asked her what was wrong, and she explained that she had a dream that we were all going to die from carbon monoxide poisoning if we stayed in the house. That's when my dad told her that all the detectors were working perfectly fine, and we decided to go back inside. We didn't smell anything, nor did the detectors go off, so we went to bed. The next day, my mother was watching the morning news before we went to school. The first story for the day was that a local family was rushed out of their home because of a carbon monoxide leak in their home, which could have been just a coincidence. But then the news station showed the house. It was our old house that we just moved out of. When I was in uni, I lived by myself. It was a nice little studio unit behind a house in a fairly decent area. I would honestly think nothing of walking places at night. There was a 24-hour McDonald's and a 7-Eleven that I would walk to often between 12 and 3 a.m., since I was a massive night owl. Well, one day after finishing an essay, at about 2 in the morning, I decided I was hungry, but didn't really have anything easy to cook, so I decided to walk down to the 7-Eleven and grab a pie or something. However, as soon as I opened my door, I was overcome by a suffocating feeling of fear. My heart started pounding. I started shaking, the works. Telling myself that this was ridiculous, I walked out to the street with the intent to still go. But that was as far as I got. I was terrified for no reason that I could understand, but no less intensely despite that. I ran back inside and ate dry cereal. Later the next day, I heard about a group of drunk guys that were causing havoc down near the intersection at the 7-Eleven. They'd beaten up someone from my uni, even though I can't explain it. I'm convinced something bad would have happened to me that night if I had ignored that feeling and gone anyway. When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. Buster was actually my stepdad's cat, but because I had never had a cat before, I claimed him as my own. Suffice it to say, Buster didn't like being hugged and cuddled all the time by a little child, so he hated me. He avoided me at all costs. He was also an outdoor cat, so we would often spend most days outside, then come in for the night. One night, Buster didn't come back in the house. We usually fed him at night, so I was worried. Our area was well known for an abundance of coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about Buster's disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped onto my bed. He laid down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked because he had never done this before. The next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loves me because he slept in my bed during the night. My parents looked at me inquisitively, and sat me down at the breakfast table to let me know that while they were outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. They thought she had been harassed by a coyote, but he was dead, so he couldn't have slept in my bed that night. To this day, I like to think that Buster just wanted to say goodbye and thank me for trying to love him in the only way a child knew how. Well, whether you believe in the paranormal, ghosts, spirits, aliens, or anything in the unexplained area, you cannot convince these people that what they experienced wasn't something out of the ordinary or wasn't real. Maybe you'll just have to experience something for yourself. See you next time.